Now we're ready for the last half of lesson number 7, the baptism of fire. And I told you that we were going to start out by learning the preamble with Indian Sign Language. And I'll tell you why it's helpful. Gouverneur Morris thought up the 6 great purposes of good government. And then he put 6 verbs with it. And when you try to memorize the preamble, you can't remember whether to provide or secure or promote or insure. And so we need a little sign language as a little crutch. Once you've memorized it this way, you'll never forget it. And we have school children now in whole areas that use this way of going through the preamble so they can remember it. Now, if you'll all put your pencils down and your books and so forth, so that your hands are free, we'll go through the preamble of the Constitution. Now, if you'll follow me, please, and I'll give you the sign language, and you do it with me, and we're going to do it 3 times, and by that time, I'm sure you'll have it memorized. Your text has it written out for you in case you forget. It's always embarrassing to be showing your children how, and all of a sudden, can't remember. All right. We, can you say it with me? All right. We, the people, that's you, of the United States, not America, just states, in order to form a more perfect union, right? Establish justice. Little scale. All right. Now put your hand up by your face. Ensure. That's a little umbrella. Ensure domestic tranquility. Now don't go to sleep on me. All right. Provide, like feed the chickens, for the common defense. See, your fists are right there. Right? Promote the general welfare. And secure. You got it? The blessings of liberty. Statue. For ourselves and our posterity. You got a lot of them, you know. Do ordain and establish. Now unroll it. This Constitution for the United States of America. Let the eagles fly. Isn't that fun? The kids like this the best of all. You have to be careful. Don't hurt anybody next to you. Isn't that fun? All right. Now we got it. Everybody memorize that? All right. Here we go. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's the spirit. That's the spirit. Away we go. I think you've got it just about now. All right. All right. It seems so good to be able to remember all of that, and so now we're going to say it just like we want to teach it to our children. Here we go. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's marvelous. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, now, we're up to Roman numeral 6 in our outline. And one of the most important provisions of the Constitution is Article 1, Section 1, which reads as follows. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a House and a Senate, a Senate and a House of Representatives. All right, our beautiful capital represents that great concept where this great Congress meets. Now, unfortunately, that has not remained the rule. You see, this gives you a right not to have to live under any law that has not gone through the process of being filtered through the House of Representatives and through the Senate and being submitted to the President. See, that's a right that gives you, isn't it? Now, that right's being violated. And on the next page, we have the discussion of what it does to us, actually. All right? The President began making laws by issuing executive orders and publishing them as new laws in the Federal Register. Now, the President has the right to issue executive orders, but to whom? The executive branch, the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Navy. But when it comes to issuing orders that goes to all the people of the United States, Article 1, Section 1 makes that mandatory that our House of Representatives and our Senate gives a chance to screen it. All right, the second thing that's happening, the President has been authorized by Congress, this isn't all the President's fault, to set up all kinds of administrative agencies with regulatory powers that the Founding Fathers tried to make unconstitutional. And each administrative agency is setting up all kinds of laws and regulations. They're never going through Congress or being filtered through them at all, and it's coming out to you as administrative law. And we have the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission, the Interstate Commerce Commission, all these administrative agencies writing their own laws. Administrative law. Then the President is doing something. He's supposed to submit all agreements with foreign countries to the Senate for advice and consent. Instead, summit meetings are being held, which would have shocked the Founding Fathers, where they go into often secret executive agreements. And it's never presented to the Senate and often is secret, like the Yalta Agreement. We still don't know what commitments were made there when President met with Mr. Stalin in 1945, the spring of 1945. Capital D, we have the Supreme Court now taking an old law, an established law, and in the process of interpreting it, writing a brand new law. Now that's been done more in our day than at any time in U.S. history. It's called judicial legislation. And that's your capital D, judicial legislation. All right, now those are violations of Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. Now let's go to Section 2, because that's going to require a remedy if we return to the tradition of the Founding Fathers. Socialism has been the thing that so swamped the Congress they couldn't write all the laws. But the Founders never intended we should have that many laws. Not even Washington knows what the law is anymore. In one regulatory agencies, the laws that have been passed are 17 feet high. They themselves don't know what's in there. This isn't the American style of government. Section 2, representatives are chosen every 2 years in the House, and the states are to decide the qualifications for those who vote. So it's 2 and states. And if you want to be a congressman, you've got to be 25, that's capital B, and a citizen at least 7 years. And you must be an inhabitant of the state that you represent. Now in England, Churchill never did belong to the area that he represented. He was out had his lovely place out in the country. He'd just go into London and say, you need a representative? Vote for me. You see, he didn't live there. Now the Founders, they thought of all these details. And capital C, a census must be taken, they said, every 10 years so that we can have the representatives determined on the basis of population for the House of Representatives. And we don't want too many. Everybody wants to give a speech. You just can't come to a decision. So there mustn't be, a person must represent at least 30,000. That's your list there. All right, now, beginning in 1913 up to 1929, they decided to fix the number of congressmen at 435. That whole series of bills finally fixed it completely. And so the population has increased. The number of congressmen has remained the same. So today, a congressman represents about 500,000. About 500,000. All right, now before slavery was abolished, the calculation of the population was 3/5 for each one of the slaves, and I've gone into that before. And that, of course, was done away with the 14th Amendment. If a representative dies, it's the governor or executive of the state that calls for a new election. Governor. And the House is authorized to choose its speaker as well as any other officers which are needed. Now, that's important because he's the one that decides who will speak and in what order bills will come up. That's a powerful position. That's a powerful position. And he's elected, of course, by the Congress, so that means he's elected by which party? Majority party, you see, the majority party. All right, if the House is authorized to choose its speaker, G, only the House can initiate impeachment proceedings. Now, that was set up by Parliament originally to go after some of the king's corrupt administrators that were serving under him so they could get rid of them because of treason, felonies, or high crimes and misdemeanors. And so if you have a judge that's corrupt and so forth, they can get rid of him by impeachment. Of course, he can also be charged in court, and we'll see that in a little while. Get rid of him that way, prove that he's guilty of something. But the House brings that charge to eliminate a civil officer of high rank. All right, Roman numeral 8, section 3 provides for the setting up of the Senate. Now, it was provided that there would be 2 senators from each state. And I was in the Senate here recently watching these great men as they debate and so forth. And they're to serve for 6 years. Now, when you go there, you'll notice that hardly anybody's down in the Senate. They have to have a quorum when they first meet, but then they all go to their committees. So you say, well, what in the world's going on here? I'll explain that to you in just a second here. Because both the presidency and the House of Representatives could undergo a complete change during a presidential election year. So we could wipe out the House, wipe out the president that year. Who's going to kind of carry on? And so they said, all right, only 1/3 of the Senate will be elected each 2 years, which means there will always be 2/3 of the Senate to maintain governmental continuity. Everybody got that? 1/3. All right, now C, to qualify as a candidate for the Senate. Anybody thinking about it now? You have to be at least 30 years old when you're sworn in. Now, you can run while you're 29, but you got to be 30 when you're sworn in. And you must be a citizen for 9 years. You must be an inhabitant of the state that you represent. Now, the Senate can't choose its presiding officer. The Constitution puts the vice president in charge of the Senate. They had to do something with him. See, he's kind of sitting around waiting for the president to die or whatever. And so if he does take over as president, he ought to be kind of in on things. He ought to know what's going on. Well, today the vice president has an office in the White House, which is probably where he belongs anyway. At least some think so. So he can watch what's happening. But it's true that as head of the Senate, he's in on all the legislation. He knows pretty well what's happening. And so that's vice president for that blank. Now, if he's not there, they are allowed to set up a president pro tem, we call it, a president pro tem. Now, it's the Senate that tries impeachment cases. The House brings the charge, the impeachment charge. The Senate does the trying. And if the president is being impeached, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has to be in charge. That's Chief Justice for your blank. All right, Roman numeral 9, section 4 relates to congressional elections and the requirement that Congress meet every year. Every year. Now, it's interesting that arrangements for the time and place for congressional elections was left up to the states. But there was a provision that the Congress could intervene if necessary. And they didn't do a thing about that. Everybody was afraid during the ratification conventions that that would be intervene, that is, the Congress would intervene too often. But not until 1842 did they do anything about it, and that was primarily to set up districts. Districts. You see, originally, supposing you had 11 representatives, when you went to vote, guess what you did? You voted for 11 people. 11 people. So that meant that every congressman was a congressman at large for the whole state. So all of the congressmen would belong to what party? The majority party. The majority party would elect all the congressmen. And some districts would say, well, that doesn't help us. Nobody in our district belongs to that party. And so they decided to divide it into districts so everybody could represent their own representative. That's why you usually have representatives from both parties from your state. Some districts are that way. Now, since in 1866, all of the states were required to have elections on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And since then, most of the acts of Congress have been to prevent fraud in the election process. Fraud. All right, capital B. Now, the Congress doesn't have to wait, as the Parliament used to be called into session. It used to be the King's prerogative to call the Congress or the Parliament. No, the Founding Fathers said we want them to meet every year. And the Congress, the House of Representatives, originally had to meet in December, first Monday in December, and that was so that in those horse and buggy days, they'd have plenty of time to get ready for the President's inauguration way up on March the 4th. It just took a long time to get everybody there, get all the committees set up and everything. Well, that's been changed now by the 20th Amendment, so that today it's provided that the Congress shall meet on January 3rd, that's your blank, to get ready for the President's inaugural on January the 20th, which is my birthday, and it was so nice of them to choose that date. All right, Section 5, Roman numeral 10, which is Section 5. That describes the internal operations of Congress, how they're going to do it. All right, capital A. Now, each House decides whether or not its members have been legally elected, or whether they are creditable people that should sit in the House with this august body of representatives. Legally elected. Now, that's kind of interesting because we had a Texas congressman in '76 who definitely was defrauded of his place in Congress. His opponent came in and stuffed the ballot boxes because the incumbent's party, the folks wouldn't turn out to watch the ballot boxes. And so the other party was stuffing them, they had everybody in the cemetery voting. And as a result, this congressman that had been ousted went to court to prove there'd been a fraud. And the court said, well, yes, you've proved that, but we can't do anything about it. You have to go to Congress. See, that's what it says. The House will decide. And when he pleaded with the House that he'd been cheated, the majority party said, well, your opponent was the one we wanted elected. We won't worry about that little problem. And so they never did straighten it out. And I want to tell you, that congressman went back in '78 to the people in Texas, and he said, all right, we've learned our lesson. You were cheated in the last election, and now let's show Congress that we mean business this time. Now you watch those ballot boxes, and you put me back in there, and I'll represent you like I did before. And boy, I'll tell you, those people of Texas in that district, they sent that congressman back with a massive vote. All right. And capital B, neither house can do business until a quorum is present, consisting of a majority. All right. That means 218 in the House and 51 in the Senate. It's 1/2 plus 1. All right. Now, I just mentioned to you a moment ago that when you go to see the House and the Senate, there's nothing down there except just a few men sitting down there. Who are they? Well, they had a quorum when they first convened. Then everybody went about their business. Everybody knows what the agenda is. They know what the speeches are going to be about. They've gone to the committees to go to work. And believe me, they work in Washington. Most of them. They work hard. Who's down there then? It's the majority leader, the minority leader, and the party whips. And they're listening to every word, even though they're reading newspapers sometimes. And the moment the issue comes up, a vote is necessary, etc., boy, the bells ring, everybody comes pouring out, and they cast their vote. That's what happens. That's the only way you can run the affairs through a committee system. So when we take our young people there, don't have them disillusioned when they don't see many people down there on the floor. All right, each of the House can make its own rules, which is number 1. And punish its members for disorderly behavior. See, a couple of them get fist fighting. They used to do that back in the abolition days when they were trying to get rid of slavery. And you don't call the police. We've got, you see, they have their own sergeant at arms. They can arrest them, they can imprison them, they can fine them. And they can expel any member with a 2/3 vote. 2/3 is 3. All right, capital D. The House is to keep a record and publish it unless some of it should be kept secret. Secret. Now, ordinarily that would worry you, but it isn't a problem really, because the minority party, whoever doesn't agree to it being secret, can leak it if it really isn't in the public interest. All right? Capital E. If 1/5, and that's your blank, want the vote recorded rather than just have a yeas and a nays, so the folks back home can know how each one voted, they have to record it. And they're given 15 minutes to accomplish that. All right, now the Congress, it's provided, it must continue in session until both houses agree to adjourn. If they don't agree, the President can set the date of adjournment, but that's never been necessary. And neither of them can adjourn for more than 3 days, and that's your blank, nor to some separate place without the concurrence of the other. The Senate can't adjourn and say, we will reconvene in Hawaii. No, not allowed. All right. Okay. Roman numeral 11, section 6 covers the sticky problem of compensation for the congressman. Well, the states had not adequately compensated them, and so they figured they'd better do it out of the U.S. Treasury. And Madison said that's indecent. We just shouldn't have done it that way, because they're working for the states, and congressmen admit that when you go there, they tell you what your retirement is, what your fringe benefits are, you do get the feeling you're working for the federal government, when they really aren't. That ought to be remedied someday. The present salary of a congressman is $60,600. All right. B, to protect congressmen in carrying out their duties, they can't be arrested during a congressional session or going and coming unless for treason, felony, or a breach of the peace. And nor can they be sued for libel. That's capital C, L-I-B-E-L, for anything they say on the floor. And that's so that they can speak freely of things that are wrong and individuals that they have heard have done wrong, so that they can be investigated. Now, capital D, they can't, did you get C, libel? All right, capital D, those elected to Congress cannot afterwards hold any position in the government which was created while they were in Congress, or the salary for it was increased, and that's your blank. Now, what's that for? Well, in Parliament, you see, they'd set up a nice job, juicy job for themselves, and they'd retire and be appointed to that nice, juicy job. And, or they would increase the salary of a job. So the founders were great. They thought of all those things. All right, Section 7 describes the procedures for passing laws. The procedure for passing laws. All right, now let me just describe that for you very briefly, because actually, because the Senate originally represented the states rather than the people, they provided that all money bills must go into the House, because that's where the taxpayers are represented. Of course, now the Senate's elected by the people, so it doesn't quite apply, but the rule has still been maintained. All right? And then after, of course, the House has covered it, then it's sent to the Senate for amendments, and that's your blank. Amendments. Now, in all other matters, you can introduce the bill in one or both of the houses, you see, to get it through. All right, now let me just describe briefly what happens when you introduce a bill. Any congressman can introduce a bill, and he'll send a copy to his constituents to say, see how I'm fighting for you? It may not mean a thing, because when a bill is introduced, it's given a number and sent to a committee, and there it dies. It dies. And that's your blank. What I want to ask my congressman is, what did you do to rally support of other congressmen so that we could get that out into a hearing? See, that's the important thing, hearing. And then it goes on to the floor for discussion, and after it's passed, then it goes to the other house where it is once again considered, and if it makes changes, then the previous house must agree to it. So that when it's finished, it must be identical before it goes to the president. They must have agreed on it or it isn't law. They cannot send it to the president. All right, when it goes to the president, he has 10 days to consider it. And if he takes no action on it, it automatically becomes law. In other words, he may say, well, I don't want my signature on it, and yet I can't find anything particularly wrong with it. I just don't like it, period. But it comes law then without his signature. And he can say, well, it became law, but I didn't sign it. But so 10 days and law are your two blanks. If he doesn't like the bill and has reasons for it, he sends it back to the House and the Senate. And if 2/3 will vote its approval, see, a massive majority, not just a bare majority, but a massive majority of 2/3, then they override the president's veto and it becomes law. Now let me just tell you this final one. If the Congress passes a lot of bills giving money to the farmers and to the school teachers and to the big business and little business, and then throws it on the desk of the president and then rushes home for Christmas, doesn't give the president 10 days, none of them become law unless he signs them. He just leaves them in his pocket, and that's why it's called the pocket veto. So without his signature, and that's your blank, it doesn't become law, so that's called pocket veto. All right, now there's one clause in the Constitution that was a little confusing, a little ambiguous and confusing. And that's Article 1, Section 7, Clause 3, which says that every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary has to go to the president. Well, there's some things that just aren't any of the president's business. And so, by mutual agreement, not by amendment or change, it's been worked out so that, number one, if they call it a joint resolution, it means they want it to go to the president just like any other law. Isn't that interesting? Just like any other law. And he can approve it or veto it just like any other law. And if they call it a concurrent resolution, that means it's not going to go to the president. It's just us congressmen, our senators and congressmen that are making this decision by ourselves, because it doesn't involve the president. Well, for example, what would that be? Well, number one, amendments to the Constitution. No provision that has to go to the president. And number two, terminating the president's war powers. I can remember after the war, the president saying, all right, leave these powers in my hands during the peace period and I'll regulate it gradually and get it under control. And the Congress said, no, we're going to take them away, and they did. And immediately America got into high gear and we just did fine. All right, or working out the distribution of funds between the two houses. Well, now we come to the conclusion of Article 1. Dealing with the preamble and the organization and structure of Congress. And next we come to the most controversial part of the whole Constitution: what powers will be delegated by the states to the Congress.